Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Sarah Avery, and I am the Executive Director of Quanta Change, and I'm so glad you're joining me today. So, do you find yourself saying this a lot? Everything's okay, or even everything's great. Um, so today I want to talk about how there might be a problem with that. Maybe you're the kind of person who everything's not okay. Maybe you're having a rough day, a rough week, a rough month, and yet you're finding yourself saying, if somebody asks you how you're doing, you say, everything's fine, everything's okay. Now, that to me is just a good strategy for keeping your life moving and, in a way, setting a certain kind of boundary that you're only going to discuss what's really going on with you with certain people. So I think that's fine. There's no problem with that at all. But do you find yourself really feeling like you need to be able to say everything's okay or everything's great? And your ability to do that really comes from squelching or dismissing or extinguishing any hint of negative feeling as quickly as you can when it comes up. So maybe that's being triggered by just some condition that you're used to, maybe a need to always be perfect, or maybe it's triggered by someone else. Maybe you're finding yourself often triggered in some way by another person or other people. So in my experience, this is usually followed by one of two things. One is just moving on, just burying the bad feeling as quickly as you can, and then just moving on to the next task, the next project, maybe some vigorous form of self-care, maybe just some kind of distraction so that you make sure that you're not really immersed in that negative feeling for any longer than is possible. Or the other is really squelching the feeling and then instantly focusing on someone else and making sure they have what they need, kind of taking care of them, making sure that they're okay. And maybe that even at times is the person who has triggered your negative feeling, and you kind of squelch your own. You say, it's not about me, and then you set about making sure that they're doing okay. So I'm wondering if that rings a bell for you. Does that sound familiar? Maybe is it a bit comforting? Maybe does it validate your experience? You feel not so alone? Or maybe you're feeling kind of uncomfortable right now. You're really regretting even having watched this video, because you're thinking, I don't want to even think about my own negative feelings when they come up, much less at some other time. So yeah, I really hear you, and I know how uncomfortable that can be. So where does this tendency come from? And why am I saying it's a problem? Well, let's talk first about where it comes from. So it comes from your survival mechanism for dealing with your learned distress. So learned distress is the quanta change term for the feeling that you absorbed very early in life that there is something wrong with you. And as you are absorbing that feeling from the people around you when you're growing up, from their bad days, their bad moments, their times when they're not feeling well, not feeling okay, your sense of self is also developing a survival mechanism that allows you to survive with that negative feeling and allows you to fit really well with your parents, older siblings, grandparents, other early caregivers. Okay, so your sense of self is a container that stores how you feel about being yourself, and it is using your learned distress and its survival mechanism to automatically generate all of the negative situations and conditions and relationships and interactions that are going on in your life on a day-to-day basis. So there's 6 of these patterns, this learned distress plus its survival mechanism, and I'll tell you what they are at the end, and I'll describe how you can find out which of those survival mechanisms you have. But some of the 6 require you to keep learned distress buried. In order to survive, your brain says, I need to not feel this icky feeling as much as possible. And along with the requirement to keep it buried, if you have one of those patterns, your brain, your sense of self also gives you lots of tools and resources to keep that learned distress buried. And so I will also say that some of those patterns are a combination of buried learned distress and experienced or felt learned distress. So you may be in one of those categories where either there's an across the board need and requirement to bury learned distress, or it's in some part of life but not in another, that learned distress has to stay buried. So why am I saying that burying learned distress and a survival mechanism that keeps learned distress buried is a problem? Are you thinking, well, are you saying I should be just marinating in negativity every day, Sarah? I mean, that doesn't sound so great. And I am definitely not saying that. And in fact, even if I were to suggest it, which I never would, I promise that that's just not even possible. You got the survival mechanism that you got, and it stays with you. So it's really not even possible to change to one of those patterns where you're just immersed in it all the time. So the problem, though, is that buried learned distress is building up over time. All learned distress builds up over time, but buried learned distress builds up over time even when you're not aware that it's there very often or at all. And maybe, are you aware of this sometimes? Do you just have a time where maybe you have a little burst of learned distress that comes to the surface? You weren't calling it learned distress. It might be irritation or anger or anxiety, or maybe days where you're just very teary. So that's a way of learned distress trying to just boil off a little bit of energy, get a little bit of it blown off. Or, and I wonder if that's you, are you feeling that those instances are getting more intense? Are they getting more frequent? Are you noticing that it's harder to get things back under control when that learned distress is rising to the surface and kind of blowing off a bit of steam, if you will? Is that your case? So that really tells you, it shows you the rising intensity of learned distress and your survival mechanism starting to fail in its ability to keep it so tightly under control. Or maybe you're experiencing it situationally. Maybe at your work, in your relationships, in some aspect of your daily life where things used to work a little bit more smoothly for you, a little bit more easily, and now it's a bumpier road. Maybe things are feeling more contentious, more stirred up, bumpier. Or maybe you're experiencing this physically. Another way that excessive learned distress can kind of blow off steam is through your body in some way, through pain, injury, illness, something going on in your body that hadn't been going on before, and now you're noticing it, and it's feeling maybe a little out of control in some way that you can't really get it back under control, I guess. So the thing is, with learned distress, once it's intense enough, you're going to feel it. Even if you've had the capacity to bury it, you're really going to feel it. And that is the problem. So that's the problem. What's the solution? Is it to find just a better way to bury it deeper? I really wish I could tell you that was the solution and there was a way to do that. I have not seen, in the past 22 years of guiding people through this process, of hearing from people who've tried all kinds of different work, who've done decades of work on themselves, I have not really heard of a single instance of someone who is at this point where the learned distress was really rising to the top, starting to boil over a bit. I have not heard of someone who was able to just really fully rebury it. Sorry about that. But the good news is that the quanta change process, this work that I do, was actually developed to not to bury learned distress, but to actually peel layers of it off permanently. And so the way that quanta change does that briefly is that it works with your brain during sleep. There are a couple reasons for that work during sleep. One is that sleep is when your sense of self, this storage tank for how you feel about being yourself, sleep is when that sense of self is getting recharged every night when you go to sleep. And the other reason for working with the brain during sleep is that there's kind of a wall of protection around your sense of self that protects it from rational level change. When your rational brain is operating, that wall of protection is up and active and protecting you from like thinking your way out of your learned distress. So quanta change was developed to get past that by working with your brain during sleep when that protection wall is deactivated. So as you go through this process, what happens is you're peeling off layers of learned distress, yes, while you're sleeping, because it's working with your brain during sleep and the recharging process that goes on during sleep. And as you peel off layers of learned distress permanently, you are actually recharging with your natural well-being. That's really what quanta change is telling your brain that you want to do during sleep, is recharge instead of with learned distress, with your core natural well-being, this feeling in your center that is who you really are. It's your uniqueness. It's the feeling that you are just great being yourself, that you have everything you need, that you are just good and well. And so as you recharge with well-being, layers of learned distress come off, your natural well-being expands to take the place that learned distress had sort of greedily taken up in your sense of self. And you feel better, and there is more and more well-being for your sense of self to use as the automatic generating fuel for moments and situations and interactions and relationships in your life, and feelings and thoughts. So what is that like when we're talking about someone maybe like you who has really buried learned distress? Well, the first thing that happens for people with one of these patterns where learned distress has been buried is that you find out that it's actually safe to feel all of your feelings, not just the good and happy ones, but it's actually safe to feel all of them. It's not going to be pleasant. No one likes to feel like they don't matter, or they don't fit, or they're not good enough. But what you get to find out is that you can actually feel all of that without, well, dying, without somebody else dying, without the sky falling, without the world ceasing to turn, without the sun disappearing. And I'll just never forget the first time that happened for me. And I got kind of to the end of sort of crying it out. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I'm still here. It's okay. I'm okay. And I can't believe it, because I was pretty sure that feeling was going to kill me. That's why I avoided feeling it for all of these years. So that's the first thing that happens. It also, as the level of learned distress comes down in that sense of self sort of feeling tank, there's less to get triggered. So situations that normally trigger you, people that normally trigger you, you find that they're not so much triggering you. It's kind of like turning the volume down on a radio. You might still feel that feeling, but it's not nearly as intense. It might have been a 14 on a scale of 1 to 10. Now it's an 8. Now it's a 6. Now it's a 3. Wow, this is very different. This is what I hear from people. And then the more and more well-being you have in the tank, the more you have access to the fuel that allows your life to work more easily, to the fuel that allows you to feel that you just matter, just being yourself, and that you get to speak and act out of that place instead of maybe burying your own needs and just taking care of everyone else. So let me give you a couple of examples of that. So one is a client of mine who was a really successful professional. She'd been at it for decades. She'd run so many meetings, so many presentations. And what she was finding over time was that even though she was an absolute expert at what she did, over time, she started to get more and more triggered. She started to feel more and more like she needed to really have some space to prepare, not her notes or her slides or something like that for a meeting, but just to sort of prepare herself, sort of like metaphorically to put on the right clothes for that meeting. And meetings became a bit more stress producing, anxiety producing. She felt like she was more triggered if something didn't go exactly the way she wanted, or if maybe somebody wasn't so happy in the meeting. There was some kind of conflict. So I wonder if you can relate to this. Are you in a place maybe in your career or in some other part of your life where you feel like, I am an expert at this. I've been at this so long. I shouldn't be worried about this. I shouldn't be stressed out about doing this thing. And yet I am. And I'm actually more stressed over time at doing this thing. I have heard this from so many people. So you're not alone. It's explainable. It's understandable because that's the evidence of the rising intensity of your learn to stress underneath the surface. So this client started unlearning learn to stress. And, one of the things that happened was that thing where she found out she could feel her learn to stress. She could feel those feelings, but not just die. But also more than that, she started to say, you know what, I'm walking into meetings and I get to just be myself. I don't have to sort of prepare myself in the way that I needed to. I don't need so much space in between meetings, say. I really can handle things so much more easily without all of that preparation. In fact, I never realized how much energy it was taking to do this thing that I was already an expert at. It's really amazing how much easier things are. And she said she was getting less triggered by people, by things not going quite as exactly as she'd expected them to be. If there was some kind of conflict or she needed to bring up some problem, it was just less triggering over time. So if you are out there and you're, say, an expert in your field, and yet things have felt more intense for you, more stressful, more anxiety producing over time, that really does come from learn to stress, and you really can see that change in a very big way. So let me give you another example. The other kind of person who sort of squelches feelings and then sort of looks at other people and starts to take care of them. So this is a client who really just kept her own feelings around relationships or triggered by relationships primarily. That's this big piece of learn to stress, that we all have the feeling that we don't matter just being ourselves. She would squelch that pretty quickly, bury that pretty quickly, and then just look at the people around her and think, who needs me? Who needs my help? And she would kind of jump in and help wherever she was needed. And she had some friends and family members who tended to, have stuff going on that could really use some help. And so it worked for them and for her for a while, but she was starting to get really exhausted by that. So I wonder if you can relate to that. I can. This is my pattern, and I can really relate to that. I wonder if you can. Are you starting to say, okay, but I need to take care of myself. I think I really got to take care of myself. I don't have so much energy to just be all the time diving in to maybe help other people. Maybe you would say rescue other people, help them out of their own conflicts, their own crises. So if this is the case for you, so here's what happened for her and has happened for lots of my clients. As she started to unlearn, one of the things she found is that she was actually starting to feel, I don't matter, in the experience of, wait a second, I think I have needs here. I think I need some stuff. I've always been feeling like everybody else needs things, but I don't need anything. And she started to realize, I have needs. And those needs need to get taken care of. I need to really be able to take care of myself first. So that happened for her. And then as she started to unlearn more, this thing happened that happens for so many of my clients, where all of a sudden one day someone around her was having a crisis that she would normally just jump right into. And she kind of looked at it and said, I don't have to do that. That's theirs. I don't have to take care of that. I don't need to do that. And that is something that happens so often for my clients where in some way, shape, or form, that thing that we have always just as a knee-jerk reaction had to do or else, one day, without talking with me about it, without having any kind of strategy around it, they just go, wait a second, I don't have to do that. That's not mine, that's theirs. Can you imagine? Can you imagine thinking that the thing that whatever it is that you've had to do every day of your life, all of a sudden you just think, oh, I don't have to do that. That's what happens for my clients. And in this kind of interpersonal way where someone like me or my client has, kind of picked other people's stuff up for them to say, well, I don't have any needs, so I'll spend all of my energy picking your crisis up, your need, and taking care of it. It's kind of like you sit that person's stuff down, set it down, and let them have it. And let them see what they're going to do with their own stuff. And it's really liberating to feel like you're not responsible for everyone around you all of the time. It's really great. So that really is possible if you're a person who's starting to maybe burn out on taking care of everyone around you all the time, even if they are fully capable adults who should be taking care of themselves. Okay, so if this is sounding interesting to you, if you're thinking, wow, that I don't have to do that anymore, or the turning the volume down on the trigger radio sounds pretty good to you, something like that. So the first thing to do, like I said earlier in the video, is to find out which pattern of learned distress and survival mechanism you have. So there's 6 of these. They are called the idealist, the perfectionist, the optimist, the caregiver, the defeatist, and the dictator, or sometimes we call that benevolent dictator. No judgment there. It's just a pattern of learned distress. The reason that you find out which one of these patterns that you have is not just so you can examine it more, just so you can dive in deeper, understand it better. Maybe you're thinking, Sarah, I am so sick of personality tests. I am so sick of evaluations, and I'm so sick of examining the problem. I don't want to do that anymore. Well, that's not what Quanta Change is about. The reason that you find out which of the patterns you have is that you're going to see what you're going to be unlearning. So in order to do that, you're going to go to my website. It's a free test that you're going to take on my website that is as a scientifically validated, in-depth personality test that measures your learned distress and survival mechanism. I'm going to send you a free personalized report from your graphed answers to that test, and it's going to show you your pattern of learned distress, your survival mechanism with it, and how Quanta Change really can start peeling off layers of that learned distress, what it looks like for people with that pattern. So to do that, you're going to go to my website, Quanta Change, Quanta, change.com, and click on the free report button and take that test, and I will send you your free report. So I hope that this has been helpful, that it's provided maybe a bit of hope for you, that things really can change and be different if you feel like you fall into one of these patterns that I've been talking about today. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that you will join me again next Friday to learn a little bit more about how Quanta Change really can help you feel good being you. Thank you.